How to manage money problems. At a business convention, after I had given a talk that included some of these ideas about the importance and effectiveness of imaging, a man came up and confronted me with a certain truculence. "Well, doctor," he said, "all that stuff about imaging is interesting, but I don't see how it can solve my problem." Naturally, I asked him what his problem was. "Money," he said, "or rather, lack of money. I'm up to my ears in debt. I have 2 notes coming due at the bank and I don't know how I'm going to meet either one of them. Will imaging put $20,000 into my checking account by next Monday? Will imaging take care of my mortgage payments and my insurance payments? Will imaging pay for my wife's new car or my daughter's debut? Come on, be honest now. Yes or no?" "That's easy," I said. "The answer is no. Imaging isn't some kind of Aladdin's lamp that you can rub and have a genie appear and bring you instant riches." "Then what good is it to me?" he demanded triumphantly. "It could do you a lot of good," I told him. "From what you say, being in debt is a way of life with you. But obviously it's not a way of life that makes you happy. If you would picture yourself debt-free with intensity and sincerity, if you would visualize vividly the happiness and peace of mind that solvency would bring you, if you would really make that your aim and give it top priority, you'd move toward that goal and finally achieve it. And that would be the result of imaging." He gave me a strange look, half skeptical, half wistful. "You mean," he said, "I should try to see myself managing these money problems? And my extravagant wife, and my spoiled daughter, instead of having them manage me?" "Something like that," I told him. "Thanks," he said. "Maybe I'll give it a try." And he was gone. I don't know whether that man will be able to upgrade his life control factor and straighten out his situation, but I do know this, with the possible exception of health problems, money problems weigh more heavily on people's minds than any other form of anxiety. Ruth and I are constantly made aware of this by the mail that reaches us. Despairing letters from elderly people whose fixed incomes are being eroded by inflation. Frantic letters from young people caught in the quicksand of installment buying or credit card spending. Panicky letters from people staggering under mountainous debts. Fear-filled letters from people who have lost their jobs. The list goes on and on. Tremendous emotional currents often swirl around money problems. A letter came in the other day from a young woman who said bitterly that she hated money. She hated it for what it did to people like herself who didn't have enough. She'd been laid off from her automotive company job. She hated it for what she claimed it often did to people who had too much. She said that America had become a materialistic, money-grubbing, dollar-worshipping society, and she blamed money for that. She even misquoted the Bible. "Money is the root of all evil," she wrote, underscoring every word. Actually, the Bible says that the love of money is the root of all evil, quite a different thing. As is our custom, Ruth and I discussed the letter and how to reply to it. Often we turn to the Bible as a guide, or play a kind of game in which each of us reminds the other of a passage that may be pertinent. In this case, we recalled various New Testament references to money, such as the widow's mite, or the 30 pieces of silver paid to Judas. "It's easy to think of the widow's mite as being good money," Ruth said, "or the money paid to Judas as bad money. But actually money itself is neither good nor bad. It's what people do with it that counts." "It can symbolize things, though," I said. "In the parable of the talents, for instance, it symbolizes both energetic risk-taking and timorous overcaution. The people in the parable were either energetic or overcautious," my practical wife said. "Not the money. So hating money, as this woman does, makes about as much sense as hating a stick or a rock." In the end, I wrote to the young woman and urged her to try to change her image of herself. "Stop seeing yourself as the helpless victim of an imaginary villain called money," I wrote. "If you personalize money so vehemently and hate it so intensely, you certainly won't ever attract it, because your unconscious mind will be programmed to repel and reject it. I urged her to create and focus on the self-image of a well-balanced, intelligent person whose mind was able to take charge of her emotions. Calm down, I wrote. Be objective. Stop all this hate business. Hold the image of yourself as someone determined to remove all these churning, turbulent, conflicting, confusing emotions from your mind. Nothing is going to go right for you until you do. Anger is just one emotion that money problems can generate. Another is fear. Not long ago, I was on a radio show, a call-in program where listeners could pick up the phone and ask questions of the person on the show. One woman who called said to me, "I wish you'd tell me what to do about bill collectors. I'm terrified of them. When a bill collector comes around, I get so nervous and full of fear that I can barely talk to him." Bill collectors are human, too. Well, I said to her, I happen to know a couple of bill collectors and both have told me how nervous they are when they come to a home to talk about non-payment of bills. They say they get tense and tongue-tied and hot and cold all over. The woman said, "I can't believe it." "It's true," I told her. A bill collector is also a human being and is not trying to harass you or be mean to you or put you in jail. He's just representing a man or woman in business who has to get money to keep on selling merchandise to people like yourself. He wants you to continue to be a paying customer, so he wants you to stay solvent. His main objective is to get you to work out a payment plan. So here's a suggestion. The next time a bill collector comes to your door, change the picture you have in your mind of what the interview is going to be like. Instead of seeing yourself as embarrassed and angry and evasive, and him as hostile and threatening, visualize a meeting between a nice person who has a job to do and a nice person who happens to have some unpaid bills. See both of you working out a solution together in a friendly way. And here's another suggestion. Before you open the door, say a quick prayer for the poor fellow, because he's probably just as nervous as you are. "Well," she said, "I certainly never thought of praying for a bill collector. But if you say so, I'll try." In trying to solve life's problems, imaging is only one of the many techniques. Through the years, trying to help people in financial difficulty, Ruth and I have worked out half a dozen simple suggestions that seem to be effective. The first is simply this: don't panic. If you find anxiety getting the upper hand, go to work imaging peace of mind. The simple act of praying creates an image of your problems being brought to the source of all wisdom, and that is tremendously reassuring and comforting. Then read the 23rd Psalm. When you come to those marvelous words, "I will fear no evil, for thou art with me." Verse 4, run them through your mind at least 20 times. Repeat them to yourself during the day if you feel your anxiety returning. Write them on a piece of paper and tape it on your bathroom mirror, where you will see it first thing every morning. Saturate yourself with this idea. Then, when you have your emotions under control, the next step is to get organized. This is Ruth's favorite bit of advice because she is a highly organized person herself. Make a complete list of all your debts, everything you owe. Make another list of essential expenses. Add up all sources of income and see what you can count on. It's amazing how many people really don't know exactly how much they owe or what their basic expenses are. Visualize yourself living within your income with a fraction left over for debt reduction. Paint that image vividly in your mind. Next, be disciplined. You have to learn to ignore that sly little destructive demon named instant gratification who lurks in all of us and whispers, "That's pretty, get it," or "That's a bargain, grab it." The demon is happiest when you don't know the true state of your finances, because then he knows you are less likely to apply the brakes. I must confess that's one of the problems Ruth and I had to work through in the early years of our marriage. Soon after we moved to New York, I decided that we had to have a new car. The old one was falling apart and beginning to cost a lot of money in repairs. So I went to a car showroom, picked out one I liked, and told the salesman to hold it for me. When I told Ruth about it that night, she shook her head. "No," she said. "What do you mean, no?" I asked her. She said, "I mean, we can't afford it." Our budget barely takes care of things now. There's no money for new car payments. So forget it. Well, naturally, this reduced me to a state of gloom, especially when I had to call up and disappoint the eager salesman. But Ruth was applying precisely the ingredient. Discipline. That fends off money problems before they can get started. A fourth suggestion we sometimes offer is blunt and to the point: think. If you'll just sit down and really think, you may come up with an idea or an insight that can change everything. I've always liked William Saroyan's story about the time when, as a struggling young writer, discouraged and almost broke, he decided to ask a rich uncle in a nearby city for a loan. With his last bit of cash, Saroyan sent his uncle a telegram. Back came a reply of just 3 words: have head examined. Once he got over the shock of this seemingly sardonic refusal, Saroyan pondered the message. Gradually he began to see what his uncle was saying: you don't need a loan. Look inside your head. That's where you'll find a solution in a new idea. Thus challenged, Saroyan sat down, thought up a plot for a short story, wrote it, sold it, and was on his way to a brilliant career as playwright and novelist. There's always an answer. Remember my druggist friend, A.E. Russ, who told me not to worry about an occasional inept sermon? He had a niece who was living in upstate New York when the crash of the Big Depression came. Her husband lost his business. Things went from bad to worse. Finally, Russ decided to go up to Utica and see if he could be of any help to them. He found his niece and her husband dejected and disheartened. All they could talk about was the depression and the grim things that had happened to them. But Uncle Alfred refused to join them in their gloomy postmortems. Let's focus on the future, he said. Find something to build on. Let's go over everything with the future in mind. Forget the past. Think of the future. As they talked, he noticed that his niece was sewing something, and he asked her what it was. She told him that it was just a pot holder. Very pretty, he said. Do you have any more? She said she had made a dozen or so. Well, said Uncle Alfred, they're good pot holders, a lot better than most. So why don't you take them down to Woolworth's tomorrow and see their buyer? He might order some. The niece was hesitant and her husband skeptical, but Uncle Alfred was firm. Let's do some practical imaging. There is going to be a factory someday, he said. A factory making pot holders and all sorts of other useful things. I can see it right now in my mind: tall chimneys, employees streaming through a gate in a big fence, an enormous sign with your name on it. Now you just go down to Woolworth's, keeping that thought in mind, and see what happens. Years later, I happened to be in a Pullman car early one morning on my way back to New York from a speaking engagement. Approaching Utica, I pulled up the shade in my lower berth and looked out. The train was passing a sizable textile factory with a tall fence and a sign at least 20 feet high. And you can guess whose name was on the sign. Why? Because in this case someone, Uncle Alfred, had his head examined, did some creative imaging, and found a simple solution to a massive problem. One more example. Soon after World War II, a young man named Hal Lemaster went to Florida to seek his fortune. Nothing much happened until one day when he was alone, fishing for trout. Nearby was a boat with an old man who kept hauling in fish while Lemaster had no bites at all. When Lemaster asked plaintively how he did it, the old fellow explained that he was using live sardines, little silvery minnows, for bait. The trout see 'em flash, he said. They can't see the bait you're using. Lemaster went home, shaped an artificial minnow out of transparent plastic, added hooks, and put a strip of shiny metal inside. Result: the famed Miralure that became a national favorite and made Lemaster a rich man. All because he had his head examined. By himself. Opportunities for money-making surround us all the time. It just takes an inquisitive, lively mind to see them. It also takes an optimistic mind, one that expects good things to happen in the future. It's not easy to stay optimistic these days because pessimism is so rampant. Newspapers are full of it. So are the airwaves. One night Ruth and I were watching a television program about the troubles of a young farmer and his family. This man had a small farm with a few cows and some chickens. But he had run out of cash and stumbled into debt, and now his creditors were going to take away his cows as payment for those debts. He was probably going to lose his house, too, we were told. He wasn't eligible for welfare. Apparently, because he still owned some livestock. His 3 children were reduced to eating sandwiches, and the gloomy thought was introduced that pretty soon there might be no more sandwiches. Now here was a genuine case of economic hardship, but the whole thrust of that presentation was to tell millions of viewers that the way to handle a money problem is to add up and focus on and dwell upon all the difficulties involved. Ruth said impatiently, "This is all so downbeat. Why doesn't someone tell those people to make a list of their remaining assets? That might give them the kind of lift they need." "What assets would you list?" I asked, just to see what she would say. "Well," she said, "the man seems healthy and strong, a vigorous person. That's asset number 1. Next, he has a wife who seems intelligent, who obviously loves him and is loyal to him. That's asset number 2. The kids are not crippled or sick or handicapped in any way, they're normal, healthy kids. So that's asset number 3. He hasn't lost his house yet, they still have a roof over their heads. That's asset number 4. Their plight is being brought to the attention of millions of sympathetic Americans, some of whom will undoubtedly try to help them. That's asset number 5. But nobody even mentions these things. On the contrary, while we continued to watch, the commentator went on to say dolefully that the young farmer had been reduced to taking on odd jobs. Reduced? I said to Ruth. What is so reducing about an odd job? Remember Michael Cardone? Michael Cardone is a friend of ours who in middle age found himself out of work. But he didn't let it get him down. One day he saw a pile of discarded, worn-out windshield wiper motors in a garage, and he began to wonder why they couldn't be fixed and sold more cheaply than new ones. So he began to fix them and sell them. A pretty odd job, because there was no demand for rebuilt wiper motors and no one had ever bothered to do it before. But he kept on, and today Michael Cardone is the head of an enormous plant in Philadelphia that makes all sorts of automotive supplies. Why? Because he had a dream, an image of being his own boss, of running his own show, of finding automotive needs and filling them. And an odd job was the springboard that started him on his way. And what he was able to image, he became. Michael Cardone is an intensely religious man. He and the top executives in his company begin every business day with prayer. They're convinced that if they have God as their senior partner, and make all decisions in the light of his teachings, they cannot go wrong. Michael himself is sure that there is a spiritual side to every great success story, and his own accomplishments seem to prove him right. Ruth and I agree with Michael in believing that there is a spiritual force in all this, something that goes beyond the reach of reason. A woman once said to me, a bit snappishly, when I was trying to help her overcome her fears about money problems, "What do you know about what I'm going through? You're a successful minister, a well-known personality, a writer of books, publisher of guideposts, a popular magazine. You don't have any debts. You don't owe anybody anything. You're not afraid somebody may show up any minute to turn off your electricity or repossess your second-hand car. So how can you understand what I'm going through?" I said to her, "I can understand it because I've been through it, too. You're too young to remember the Great Depression, but I do, and believe me, it makes all these recent recessions look like Sunday school picnics." I told her that back in 1930, I was a young minister, recently married, in Syracuse, New York. My salary, which had been a handsome, for those days, $6,000 a year, was cut twice. First to $5,000, then to $4,000. We had no manse or home supplied by the church. Everyone was frightened and depressed. Businesses were failing. Nobody could borrow money, there was no money to be had. Men used to greet one another grimly by saying, "Have you had your pay cut yet?" Everyone had to take several cuts before that depression ended, and many people lost their jobs altogether. At $4,000 a year, I just didn't see how we could get by. My salary was the only income we had. I was helping my younger brother with college expenses, and I knew he had to count on that. The pressure got worse and worse. I hated to burden Ruth with my fears. One night I went out alone and walked through Walnut Park near our little apartment, and for the first time in my life I felt icy terror clutching at my mind and heart. I wasn't just worried, I was terrified. When I finally went home, I could keep it to myself no longer. I said to Ruth, "We're in a desperate situation. We can't pay the bills. What are we going to do?" And her answer really startled me. She said, "We're going to start tithing." Our financial problem solved. Tithing? I echoed. Tithing with what? We can't do it. It's impossible. No, Ruth said. Not impossible. Essential. You know what the Bible promises to those who give 10% of everything to the Lord. I can see her yet, standing right there in the kitchen and quoting Malachi 3 verse 10 to me, "Bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse. And prove me now herewith, saith the Lord of hosts, if I will not open you the windows of heaven, and pour you out a blessing, that there shall not be room enough to receive it." We're going to do that, she said stoutly, and we're not going to starve either. We're not going to be evicted. We are going to get by on 90% of your twice-cut salary because tithing is an act of faith, and the Bible says that if we have faith even as small as a grain of mustard seed, nothing will be impossible for us. We have to start imaging God's prosperity. So we did it. And Ruth was right, we did get by. Money certainly didn't pour in, but there always was just enough. Furthermore, the act of tithing seemed to calm my fears and stimulate my mind so that I began thinking. I started imaging. I knew I had one small talent: public speaking. And so I decided to try to capitalize on that. I offered myself as a public speaker wherever one was needed. I spoke at civic clubs and garden clubs and graduations and community gatherings. Sometimes I was paid $5 or $10, sometimes nothing at all. But it helped. What a thrill I felt when I received the first $25 fee. Then someone who heard me speak offered me a chance to go on radio. Again, there was no money for this, but the number of speaking invitations increased. So one thing led to another, and gradually we began to get our heads above water. I am convinced that tithing did it. Anyway, Ruth and I have been tithers ever since, and there is something about this practice of giving that can't be explained in purely rational terms. Tithing seems to put a person in touch with some mysterious force that attracts money. Not a lot of money, necessarily, but enough for the tither's needs. Through the years, in sermons and talks I have recommended tithing to thousands of people, and hundreds have been persuaded to try it. Of those hundreds, not one has ever come back to me and said that the experiment failed, or that he regretted it, or that it was a mistake. Not a single one. It's almost as if there were an invisible reservoir of abundance in the universe that can be tapped if you will just obey certain spiritual laws. The word abundance, I'm told, comes from a Latin phrase meaning to rise up in waves. When you tithe, it does seem as if little waves of abundance start rising up all around you. So if you have financial difficulties, face up to them not just with courage and intelligence, but also with warm-hearted generosity and concern for others. Here, then, are the key things to remember where money problems are concerned. 1. Don't panic. Fear not only paralyzes the will and the mind, but it also seems, in some mysterious way, to scare money away, probably because fearful people are not creative or resourceful people. So try to be calm, be objective, be logical, be hopeful. 2. Get organized. Figure out exactly what your income is and what your outlays are. If you can't increase the former, reduce the latter until your budget is in balance. That's the only way to get runaway finances under control. 3. Be disciplined. Don't be an impulse buyer. Give up all credit or installment buying until you are debt-free. 4. Think. Look inside your head for new ideas, new possible sources of income. Money problems can become assets if they force you into creative thinking. You may strike a vein of gold, as Michael Cardone did, that will last for the rest of your life. 5. Give all you can. Giving is the best way to put yourself in the great invisible stream of abundance that surges through the universe. Tithing is the surest way to do this, because God Himself has guaranteed the results, and God's promises never fail. 6. Visualize yourself as debt-free. Imagine vividly the relief, the happiness, the peace of mind you will feel when the last payment is made. Hold that idea in your conscious mind until it sinks down into your unconscious mind. And then you will have it forever, because it will have you.